This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenborough, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking over the game against Middlesbrough by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson and Sam Woods after the game. So let's begin. A determined Crystal Palace side lost narrowly to Tony Pulis' resolute Middlesbrough in the League Cup round of 16 thanks to an eye-catching effort from Lewis Wing. Wing scored the only goal of the night with a fantastic drilled shot from distance that secured Borough's progression into the Cup's quarter-finals, where they were faced by Burton Albion. His goal always seemed likely as Middlesbrough got off to the brighter start at the Riverside, breaking into Palace's box several times within the first few minutes as Eagles shot-stopper Vicente Gaeta found himself repeatedly collecting the ball sooner than he would have hoped to. Borough appeared to have been gifted a golden opportunity when Martin Braithwaite set himself upon the end of a Paddy McNair cross, only to find himself unable to bring the ball down in time to strike the Eagles' net. Minutes later, as the chilled Teesside atmosphere built, Captain Grant Ledbetter looked to have threatened the Palace goal, but sent a well-driven shot over the crossbar from the edge of the penalty box. Borough continued to threaten, and Braithwaite would have found himself through on goal had it not been for a trademark Aaron Wan-Bissaka tackle to dispossess the Danish forward. The game had become more evenly weighted 20 minutes in, and neither side seriously threatened the other. Palace's best chance of the half came when Andros Townsend sent a lofted ball over the Borough box from close to the byline, only to see his cross not capitalised upon. Shortly after, Jeffrey Slutt ran powerfully into the opposition's box, but was frustrated to see his effort deflected into the hands of the diving keeper. Slutt, in his second attempt on a home-side's goal moments later, again found himself testing the keeper, but shot straight at him as he held the ball well. However, it was Borough who came in closest in the first 30 minutes as Jordan Hugill shot inches over from close range, following a probing ball by Daniel Ayala. Shortly after, Braithwaite stormed into the Palace box, only to head wide from a distance, having gotten his head to McNair's in-swinging cross. Hugill then completed a trio of Borough chances in quick succession when he shot over Gaeta's crossbar. Jordan Ayew had a brief chance to take the lead for the Eagles, but was swiftly challenged by two players to nullify his threat. However, it was Middlesbrough who would celebrate as the first half drew to a close, when Ring rifled the ball into the top left of the visitors' net from distance to break the deadlock. Palace started the second half a much improved side and, having switched to a 4-3-3 formation, were able to drive their way into the home side's box from the off. Max Meyer saw a shot sail close to the post in the 47th minute as the Eagles appeared rejuvenated. Ayew again found his attempts on goal well dealt with, as his shot from close range was, much like the one before, blocked by a resolute home defence. At the hour mark, the game's second half was still yet to yield a goal, but it seemed that Palace were the more likely side to score as they found themselves threatening in the Borough box continuously, only to see their pressure resulting in nothing. Despite Palace's apparent initial spell of dominance, the game had settled down by the 70th minute, and Borough saw their only chance of note raise over the bar from a spectacular Saville effort. At the other end of the pitch, Mai couldn't take advantage of a fine cross, so instead watched his scuff effort scooped up by the thankful keeper, while Borough found themselves ruining Fletcher's missed header minutes later. Aaron Wan-Bissaka forced the home side into holding their breath as he consecutively threaded in two exceptional balls, only for the dense Borough defence to do what they had done all night and nullify Palace's onslaught with numbers inside the box. Townsend came close with only 2 minutes left of the game to play, but he couldn't bury his effort past the strong home keeper. The assault from Palace didn't ease up for the remainder of the match, but by the end of the night it was only Wing's exceptional goal which separated the sides, and Middlesbrough finished eventual winners. It was a poor night from start to finish as Crystal Palace crashed out of the Carabao Cup on Wednesday with defeat against Middlesbrough. Lewis Wing's long-range effort in first half stoppage time was the difference as Middlesbrough recorded a 1-0 victory at the Riverside Stadium. There was very little to cheer about for the travelling Palace fans, but for those who missed it, here are the key talking points from the defeat. A missed opportunity. A cup upset was always a possibility, with the news that Roy Hodgson had made 8 changes for the clash with Middlesbrough. With a spot in the last 8 up for grabs, Palace could and probably should have taken the competition a little bit more seriously, as a full-strength side would have surely been too much for the Championship outfit. Instead, Tony Pulis' side dominated the game from start to finish and could have had more goals if they had been a little bit more clinical in the first half. With relegation from the top flight deemed to be unlikely, fans will no doubt have been disappointed that they weren't given the opportunity to see another step in the direction of Wembley, a destination which, given Middlesbrough's home draw with Burton, could well have given them a realistic chance to reach a major final. Hodgson couldn't hide his disappointment after bowling out of the competition at the Riverside, and attention will now turn to a tough test against Chelsea this weekend. Jordan Ayew's lacklustre display. There are a number of poor displays in this Palace side, but it was the former Swansea man who took the headlines for the wrong reasons. Ayew had a torrid evening as he looked way off the pace and struggled to provide any kind of inspiration for the Eagles. Without a goal to his name since he arrived at Selhurst Park, the 27-year-old has showed little signs of ending his dry run here, as he put in a half-hearted display which hardly caused the Borough defence to break sweat. If Ayew is to keep his place in Roy Hodgson's starting 11, then he faces a tough challenge to increase not only his productivity but his work rate and desire to show exactly why the goalless striker deserves to lead the Palace line. Milivojovic's impact. It may not have been Palace's night, but one man certainly changed the game after his introduction. The skipper took the game by the scruff of the neck after his introduction in the 65th minute, as he looked to find a way back into the game. Starting by barking orders at the defence around him, Milivojevic looked forward every time he got the ball, as he looked to thread the ball into the attack and tee up the more creative players around him. It was no coincidence that the likes of Max Meyer and Andros Townsend also came into life after his introduction, as he lifted the spirits of the entire Palace camp. It may have been too little too late, but Roy Hodgson will certainly take heart in the fact that he has such a natural leader within his ranks. A wanted man. A talking point going into the evening was Jason Puncheon. Middlesbrough were heavily linked with a move for their out-of-favour midfielder over the summer. After being named in the starting 11, it was clear that all the eyes were going to be on the midfielder. It was a slow start to the game for Puncheon, as he sloppily gave the ball away in key areas, but he did grow into the game and showed any Borough representatives a glimpse of what he could bring if they decided to revive their interest in the January transfer window. His Palace future may be up in the air, but based on his display at the Riverside, it remains to be seen whether the Championship side would have seen enough to make another bid for the experienced midfielder. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you are on Facebook, do feel free to join the Facebook group, which is a really great place to join the discussions and also share your opinions with other fans. And if you are someone like myself who likes to go on forums, and not only to obviously look at others' opinion, but also to post your opinion and sort of evoke sort of discussions with other Palace fans. So if you are someone like that, like myself, who obviously wants to get involved, then of course I would highly recommend the Facebook group. And also, if you are like myself and you'd like to keep up to date with all things Palace, whether that be the latest news, latest transfer news, latest rumours, or even sort of our general views as a page after every game, then of course do head over to our Twitter and Facebook pages at Crystal Palace, because like I said, we do regularly update with the latest news, and especially with the January transfer window, well, I suppose it's summer one as well, but both transfer windows we do regularly update them and we keep it sort of up to date as much as we can. So if you are someone who wants another place just to get all the latest Palace news, then of course you can follow us on there. And if you do want to share your opinion or obviously get involved in discussions in a sort of a forum type basis, then of course you can join our Facebook group. Now, another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10. Now, even if you don't want to do that, then of course feel free to comment your views of the game, but the main reason I want you to do this is just that I'm going to give you my player ratings. So I just want to see how sort of your opinion compares to mine, and see whether we thought all of the players had sort of similar standards of performances, but also any other fans, whether they be Middlesbrough or whether they be Palace fans, if they come to the podcast, it's not all about just listening to me, but also they can read the comment section just so they can get sort of a broader view of what most fans' thoughts were of the game. But like I've said, you know, if you do want to share your opinion, albeit not the player ratings, but just your general opinion of the game, then of course feel free to share that below as well. And if you do have any questions for myself or any other Palace fans, then of course do feel free to also drop them below, because obviously I for sure will reply back to you so we can have a discussion, but I'm sure any other fans who also come to the video might also do the same. Now, I'm just going to talk about the game slightly, because, you know, it was a 1-0 loss, not really the most exciting game, but also obviously not the greatest in the fact that it's a bit embarrassing to lose to lower league opposition. So like I do for every cup game, and I've said this quite a lot already this season, but obviously cup games are not as important for some people, so already I'm just going to summarise the players' performances as opposed to going into quite a lot of detail, and that's mainly because most people concentrate on the league, don't really care for the cup, especially the League Cup, because the League Cup is sort of less prestigious, let's say, than the FA Cup. Nevertheless, obviously it's not great that we've been knocked out, considering we could have had Burton in the next round. But nevertheless, we're out of the cup now. Now, obviously, like I've said already, and I've mentioned it, losing to lower league opposition is a bit embarrassing, and we don't really want to talk too much about the game. We don't really want to dwell on it, because we had such a good performance in the Premier League at the weekend. So, although it's not great that we did lose this game, you've got to look at it and go, yes, we lost against lower league opposition, but it was against our second side, and also it was in a cup. So, really, we haven't really lost anything other than the game. We haven't lost points, we haven't dropped points. So, if anything, if we can just sort of put this game behind us and just go into the Chelsea game with a similar sort of mindset and performance to the game against Chelsea, and to consider we're not going to have a second string side, we're going to be playing our starting 11, we're going to be playing our strongest 11, then hopefully we'll go into that game and play much better. But I've got to say, obviously it's a terrible game anyway in terms of just the play from Palace, how sloppy we were, how sort of lethargic we were. So obviously the game as a whole wasn't that great, but I just think the fact that we had this sort of second 11, they didn't really perform well after sort of all that excitement after Arsenal obviously wasn't great. But like I've said, obviously we've lost this game here, but I don't really think it's going to affect the team too much, mainly because, like I've said, it was a second string side, and obviously going into the Chelsea game, we're probably going to make 9 changes again from midweek, mainly because we're just going to be playing our strongest 11 as opposed to sort of the fringe players who don't necessarily get a looking in the side. But there are 1 or 2 players who I'll go on to mention in the player ratings who actually, you've got to give them a bit of mention, because I personally do think that they should either be starting in the league or should be sort of getting on the fringes of the squad overall. But if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've already mentioned, or of course join the Facebook group, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, and I'm going to start in goal with Vicente Gaeta. Now overall I do think he made quite a few good crucial saves early on in the game, and that's mainly because we weren't playing that great, so it meant that Borough had the control of the game, and basically they just kept peppering balls into the box, kept putting crosses into the box. So of course that's going to put us on quite a lot of early pressure, and that's mainly because we didn't start the game well. We sort of just thought we'd sit back and just sort of ride it through, whereas Middlesbrough, they had that determination, kept putting pressure on us, and obviously that meant that someone like Vicente Gaeta had to make saves. So of course quite early on he made some crucial saves, so in that respect he's obviously done his job really well. And I don't really think he could have done too much with the goal. It's a stunning effort. Obviously there was a handball in the run up to it, so you could say the referee missed that, and we've got this goal when actually we should have had a free kick. But whichever way you look at it, it was a very good strike from Lewis Wing. I think he's quite a young player, sort of up and coming from Middlesbrough, so it's great for him to score it, but not great for us. But I personally think Vicente Gaeta couldn't really have done much with it, and the fact that he still dealt with the early crosses and shots early on in the game, obviously for that reason I'm going to give him a 7, because I don't necessarily think he was terrible. You can't really fault him for the goal, but at the start of the game when he was under quite a lot of pressure, he was able to sort of to weather that storm and made quite a few crucial saves under that. Obviously playing at right back was Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Now I'm going to give him a 5 overall. I think in the first half Martin Braithwaite was playing really well, and Wan-Bissaka, even though he's been fantastic so far this season, he had a torrid time against him. I don't know what it was, whether he was just struggling to get into the game, whether he was still tired from the game against Arsenal at the weekend. Not sure what it was, but he didn't necessarily have the greatest game against him. And obviously Braithwaite was able to continuously get past Aaron Wan-Bissaka really easily, and maybe you could argue that was one of the reasons we had so many crosses being pumped into the box by the Middlesbrough players. It's mainly because they were able to get past our wing backs fairly easily. Now obviously it wasn't necessarily helped by Townsend's lack of cover, and that's something we've seen in the Premier League, and I've mentioned that quite a lot. Andros Townsend likes to come back, likes to obviously help the defenders, but also offer that sort of option on the overlap. He didn't really give that to Wan-Bissaka here, so you could argue that was one of the reasons why he struggled a bit, is the fact that he didn't have that cover, not necessarily just for defensive work, but actually going forward, because they weren't having that option there, they weren't as effective going forward. But actually I do think, in terms of a saying, a game of two halves, I do think actually he looked promising in glimpses going forward, and especially in that second half. So although his first half was quite horrid, I do think it was a game of two halves for Wan-Bissaka, and actually he sort of brought it up in that second half. But the reason I'm going to give him a 5 is just because it was overall quite a disappointing performance by his standards, and even though he did improve in the second half, I can't really give him anything higher than a 5 because his overall performance wasn't good enough. Now in terms of the centre-back, Martin Kelly was playing at the back alongside Jara Riedewald. So I do think Kelly had an alright game against Borough. Yes, he had a tough evening against them because they kept attacking us, kept putting balls into the box. And it did look like at times that Kelly was struggling. But I do actually think that once Luca came on, I think he shored things up, gave them a little bit more protection, obviously in front of the back foot, and obviously allowed some of the more creative players to go forward. And because of that change, because of Milivojevic doing that, it just made it sort of, I suppose if you had to pick out one player, it did seem to improve Martin Kelly the most, mainly just because it made him look a little bit more assured at the back. And I suppose for that reason, the fact that he was able to pick up his performance from the first half and just play the rest of the game quite well, I'm going to give Martin Kelly a 6 overall. Obviously Jara Riedewald playing in his sort of unnatural but natural position. Obviously when he's played for Palace, he's, other than that first game he played under Frank de Boer, he's primarily played as a midfielder. Obviously in this game here, moved back to central defence, and I don't necessarily think he was terrible, don't really think he was the greatest, but it was quite obvious for me the fact that he kept getting dragged out of position, that it's not necessarily his best position, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 5 overall. Now in terms of getting dragged out of position, I think the reason is just the fact that he made it too easy for Borough. So Borough were, it was far too easy for them to get past, to get past our back four, mainly because someone like Jara Riedewald was dragged out of his position. And I personally think, for me, yes, he has played centre back previously, but I think the fact that he's played the majority of the time at Palace as a midfielder just means that as a midfielder you've got to be on that pivot, you've got to move around the field. So maybe sort of having that mindset, he's gone into this game here, sort of not necessarily forgot he's playing as a central defender, but just maybe, still in that mindset of playing in the midfield, and because of that he got dragged out of position quite a lot. And obviously that allowed Borough to get into dangerous positions, allowed them to sort of move into attacking pockets of space that they could actually get the ball into it. And overall I do think it was a pretty poor performance, but I've got to say, the goal we conceded, you can't really put too much blame on him other than the fact that he was dragged out of position. So overall, not the worst performance, but certainly not the best. I do think a 5 is a fair reflection. Now obviously Papa Suarez was playing at left back, and it was nice to see him come back into the side, but much like Jara Riedewald, the fact that he hasn't really played that much, and the fact that he hasn't necessarily had that much game time, I do think it was once again a disappointing performance from him, and I'm going to give him a 5 overall. Now obviously, like I said with Wan-Bissaka, and the fact that Braithwaite was able to get past him fairly easily, the thing with Papa Suarez is the fact that he just let in too many crosses into the box. And like I said with Wan-Bissaka, and the fact that quite early on in the game we were getting peppered from crosses and shots by the Middlesbrough players. One of the reasons for that is because both Wan-Bissaka and Papa Suarez were just allowing too many crosses into the box. Now as the game went on, people like Wan-Bissaka and Martin Kelly picked up their form and improved as the game went on. Papa Suarez didn't really do that, and really still had little impact on the game overall. And although at the beginning of the game there were a few chances where he got forward and put quite a few promising crosses into the box, as the game went on he put in more sort of poorer and poorer balls into the box, and overall that really just sort of epitomised his performance in the fact that he wasn't necessarily the greatest defensively by allowing Middlesbrough to get balls into the box, and actually going forward, bar a few crosses into the box, the majority of them were quite poor overall. Now moving into midfield, I'm going to start on the right with Andros Townsend. This is a player who will come up for quite a lot of debate, but I think overall, even though he didn't provide that cover for Wan-Bissaka, I did think occasionally he posed a threat, so for that reason I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now like I've already mentioned, I did think occasionally that going forward he did provide quite a lot of threat, but for the majority of the game he was just sort of marked out of it by Friend at the back. And with a Tony Pulis side, we've seen it when he played, when he was a manager of us, it's the fact that they like to sit deep, absorb all the pressure, and obviously go on the counter-attack, and obviously sort of attack the opponent's weaknesses at the back. And Andros Townsend seemed to suffer from that. It wasn't necessarily, I suppose, a lack of effort. It's just the fact that he was being marked out of the game really efficiently by Friends. So, I think a lot of people have come out on Twitter and stuff and said, that Townsend was completely useless, hasn't really been the player he has been previously. But I just think in this game here, the fact that he played at the weekend, maybe he was a bit tired as well. But if you combine that, let's say that tiredness, that fatigue, and if you combine that with something like you've got no sort of creativity on the game, no sort of impact because you're being marked and defended against so well against the opposition player, then of course that's going to affect you overall. But like I've said, I've given him a 6 mainly because he got a little bit more friendly when he was a little bit more joy and freedom when he was moved to the left hand side. But the fact that he still couldn't make a difference even when he had more joy and he was playing much better, I don't really think I can give him anything higher than a 6 overall. Now, playing alongside him in centre midfield, it was Max Meyer, and much like what we saw against him at the weekend against Arsenal, when he came off the bench he was great there, and although he wasn't the greatest here, I do think the fact that he played the whole game, I do think that actually he played really well. Now I'm going to give him a 6 overall because I do think, much like quite a lot of players in this game, he struggled to I suppose, to take the game by the scruff of the neck, and obviously with him playing in the centre of the pitch, he obviously would be the guy to control the game and obviously dictate the play, let's say. But obviously he did struggle to do that, especially in that first half, and because we were playing sort of with a 2-man midfield, it left us quite exposed at the back, and that's mainly because we normally have someone like Luka Milivojevic just covering that area, but because he wasn't there, it meant that when Max Meyer went forward and went to attack, which is his normal sort of position in the team, as we saw against Arsenal, when he done that, he obviously exposed the back line because there was no one there, no defensive midfielder just to go back and obviously give them protection. And ultimately, if you look back at the goal we conceded, obviously the defence were put under pressure, so they've been dragged out of position, then the player shoots from 25 yards and it goes in. So it just goes to show that if Max Meyer had been playing slightly deeper, or we had been playing with a 3-man midfield as opposed to a 2, maybe we wouldn't have left the back so exposed, and maybe we would have gone on to not concede the goals we did. But overall, I do think that when Luka came on, I do think it allowed Max Meyer to go slightly further forward, and obviously that's his more natural position. I personally think, obviously he's played as a defensive midfielder previously, but I personally think from what I've seen with him at Palace, I do think he's much better going forward. And when he was moved into that more advanced role, yes, he couldn't necessarily make the breakthrough. He had a few shots, he sort of messed one up at the last minute. Yes, obviously that's not great, but the fact that he actually had more influence in that attacking role just really goes to show that if he had been playing in that position early on in the game, maybe he could have had more impact. But I do think a 6 overall is fair. Obviously playing alongside him was the captain of the night, and that is Jason Punchin. Now I'm going to give him a 6 overall, and this is another one that will come up for debate. Some people thought he was terrible. I personally think, yes, he was quite slow to start the game, but he grew into the game, and that's a common theme with quite a lot of players here. And the damage was already done, so because we started the game slowly, we got punished for it. And even when we picked up the momentum, because obviously Borough already had that goal, we couldn't really get into it. And that's sort of the theme of the game, is the fact that we didn't take our chances. And then when we did have more sort of chances in terms of getting more control of the game, it was already too late. So it just goes to show that Punchin was probably one of these players here who it was a bit too late when he sort of started to play well. Now, one sort of positive, I suppose, of his performance, and the main reason I've given him a 6, is the fact that he always looked to play the ball forward. But the fact that, we're playing a 2-man midfield, so you're automatically going to have less control of the midfield because you're playing with one less man. And because of that, it just allowed Borough too much space between the midfield and the defence. And that just goes to show why we got dominated for the majority of the game, is the fact that we were just too open in midfield. Because we were playing only 2 men in that 4-4-2 formation, it basically meant that there was too much space for Borough to get into. And because we gave them space between the defence and midfield, it allowed them to play very nice sort of build-up play and get really nice sort of passing moves around our midfield, and ultimately that's why Borough played as well as they did. But obviously Jason Punchin here, I suppose you could say, like I said with a few players, it was sort of a game of two halves from his perspective. He started the game pretty slowly, weren't that great, probably a 4 overall. As the game went on, yes, he looked better and looked to get forward, but ultimately because we left our midfield too open, it didn't really go well, and obviously it was a bit too late for him to start playing in better, mainly because the damage was already done. Now Jeffrey Stubb, this is a guy who's going to come up for a lot of criticism, and I do think, I've seen a few people sort of give him really low ratings. A few people like myself, I'm going to give him a 5 because I know he was terrible in the game. He was not only going forward was he terrible, but actually going back and defending as well. So everything about his game was terrible, but obviously he was sort of a player who was the opposite. He was a player who started the game relatively well in comparison to his teammates, but as the game went on, he got progressively worse. And if you had to look at a first half performance sort of rating, maybe a 5, and if you're looking at the second half, you're looking at a 3 or a 2, and that just goes to show how his performance was. Now, I talked about Punchin and Wan-Bissaka in the fact that they had games of 2 halves, in the fact that their first half was rubbish, second half was much better, albeit a bit too late. Actually, Jeffrey Stubb was the opposite in the fact that early on, He caused loads of problems, you know, surging into the area, albeit with not that much sort of final product or end ball. But obviously in that second half he completely dropped off the cliff and his performance was absolutely abysmal. Now you could argue that he was probably one of our most dangerous outlets, and when you have a performance as bad as that, when you've got a player playing as bad as Jeffrey Schlupp and he's the most dangerous outlet, that's obviously quite a worry. And like I've said already, you know, early on in the game he did cause problems, but he struggled with that final ball, and then when he stopped causing problems and just sort of went anonymous in the game, it seemed to, you know, just absolutely sort of tear apart and destroy his performance overall. And like I've said already, the thing that really disappointed me and many others is probably because because he didn't get taken off. You know, we've seen other players get taken off. You know, Connor Wickham was on the bench, for goodness sake. Why not play him when someone like Jeffrey Slupp's playing that bad? And also just the fact that Jeffrey Schlupp, you know, he used to be able to carry the ball well when he was playing at left back. He used to dribble into the box. This game here, it wasn't like it was like he couldn't even pass 5 yards. He couldn't dribble 5 yards. He couldn't control the ball. Everything he'd done about his game was very lacklustre. And I personally do think maybe I'm being a bit generous giving him a 5, but I do think that maybe people giving him a 4, it obviously is warranted, but for his first half performance I'm going to give him that 5 overall. So playing in as our strike partnership was Jordan Ayew and Alexander Sorof. Ayew, even though he played relatively well against Arsenal at the weekend, didn't necessarily had the best game here against Middlesbrough, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 5 overall. I did think he added very little to Palace's attack, so we thought that combining two players who done well against Arsenal, in the fact that Ayew, just in terms of his energy and build-up play, and obviously Alexander Sorof with the impact he made off the bench, by combining these two players together with the fact that they can both hold up the ball, they're both, you know, good at getting into the area and driving forward, we thought that'd be a good idea. But here didn't really work, and Ayew especially giving him that 5, mainly because he added very little to Palace's attack. And he was another player who had a game of two halves in the fact that he grew into the game in the second half, but he still sort of struggled to make an impact. And you know, if you're looking at his game split into two halves, you're looking at the first half going probably a 4 overall, and I do think second half maybe a 5. So I do think my 5 overall is relatively fair. And actually, you know, if you're looking back at his, you know, chances and the fact that he didn't have little impact, if you look back at what he did in the game, it's very difficult to sort of pinpoint things, because it wasn't like you could say he had a few shots, because he rarely ever got on the ball. It's not like you could say he carried the ball and sort of was the spearhead of our attack, because he wasn't that. So overall I do think a fairly, you know, disappointing sort of anonymous performance from Ayew. Now Alexander Sorof was slightly better, you know, not the greatest, but slightly better, and I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Like he done against Arsenal, I thought he held up the ball really well, and actually, given his height, yes, he may not have been the best at it, but the fact that he won his aerial duels was obviously quite good. But what has been a common theme for us, not just in this game but quite a lot this season, is that the attackers are isolated up top. So Alexander Sorof, you can put the ball up to him, he can hold it up well, he can win aerial duels, but if you're going to leave him isolated and not supply him other than getting the ball to his head, then nothing really, you know, nothing's going to really come from the attack. And obviously, you know, the fact that we were playing so poorly, and the fact that we obviously didn't have that many players in the midfield, because we were playing with one less player, because we didn't have that connection between the midfield to the attack, we didn't have that sort of partnership, it obviously meant that Sorof and Ayew were both isolated, which did seem to harm sort of our attack quite well. It seemed to harm us going forward. Now, in terms of what he'd done with the Borough defence, I think he occupied them very well, so in that respect he done well, and I think that's the main reason I'm going to give him this 6, because I know a few people will give him 4s and 5s, but I do think the fact that he held up the ball well, won all of his aerial duels, albeit with no end product or no real quality from it, the fact that he occupied the defence well, I do think is the main thing for me. Now I'm just going to move on now to the subs. Obviously Luka Milivojevic, Sam Woods and Sully Kaikai. In terms of Milivojevic, as I've already mentioned, he came on for Jordan Ayew. I think he was the guy who changed the game for us, and albeit he changed the game, it was too little too late, and actually we didn't necessarily have enough time, or he didn't have as much influence to completely change the game overall. But I do think as soon as he came on, he sort of instantly increased the intensity of the game, whether it was just his quality or just his experience, or just the fact that he's the captain and obviously he wanted to get the team going. I don't know what it was, but he obviously increased the momentum, I suppose, of the team overall. But like I said, it was too little too late, and although he allowed someone like Maya the freedom to go slightly further forward, yes, that obviously helped us in the game, but like I've already mentioned, and I keep coming back to this point, yes, he made all this difference, but it was too little, too late. And it does beg the question, if he had been brought on earlier, or even if he had started the game, because I wouldn't be against that, maybe we would have seen a different result in the game, mainly because of just how comfortable he was in the ball, how he controlled the midfield, and the fact that even though he was on the bench and only played sort of the last half an hour or so, the fact that he was still our best player on the pitch is really quite disappointing. But obviously, like I've said, good impact off the bench, and hopefully he'll continue that against Chelsea at the weekend, so I'm going to give him a 7 for his performance here. Obviously, the youngster Sam Woods came on to replace Papa Soare. Going to give him a 6 overall, because obviously it's a great sort of moment for him coming on the pitch, making his debut as a Palace fan, playing for Palace. That was obviously great to see, and the fact that he actually played really well, even though he was on the pitch for such a short time, the fact that he was so young and actually played so maturely and actually looked like quite a competent defender, that was of course great to see as well. And sometimes when you make your debut, you can make little mistakes, or the sort of the moment gets to you. The fact that he coped really well, and everything that was thrown at him, you know, Middlesbrough trying to get that second goal to concrete their place in the next round, the fact that they were putting all that pressure on us, the fact that he dealt with it really well and actually just slotted in the team as if he'd always been there, that was of course great to see. So I do think a 6 is a fair result. And Solu Kaikai came on for Jason Punch, and not really going to give him a rating, because I personally think he should have been brought on much earlier, because, you know, I do think he looked lively. So if having him on for an extra 20 minutes or so, if that had just given us a bit more sort of attacking threat, or just a little bit more sort of energy in the side, that would have been great to see. But like I've said, I can't really give him a rating, because even though he did look lively, he wasn't really given that much time to make an impact. Now, just summarise the game overall, you know, I don't really want to dwell too much on it, because it's quite embarrassing, as I've already mentioned. But obviously both sides made 8 changes for the Cup, which is obviously inevitable when you consider it's not necessarily the highest priority for both managers. You know, obviously Middlesbrough, they've got their promotion hopes, obviously under Tony Pulis, and obviously us here at Palace, who obviously we want to stay in the Premier League, but also we wanted to go on a cup run as well. So the fact that that sort of opportunity has now sailed is disappointing. And when you consider we would have got Burton Albion in the next round of the Cup, not only would that have been a great game in the fact that it's our first home game of the season in the Cup, but also it just would have been great to play against lower league opposition, because it gives us a greater chance. Not guaranteed, as we saw here, the fact that we lost to a championship side, but it just gives us a little bit more assurance in the fact that we would be able to get to the next round. And that would have been so nice, you know, to get past Middlesbrough, get past Burton, one of the easiest cup runs you could get to the semi-final. But obviously overall we weren't able to do that overall. And obviously, like I've said already, you know, both managers, clubs, their sort of league position and jobs are never, you know, they're always going to be based around the league. So it's never going to be a thrilling game, it's never going to be full of excitement, but it would have been a lot better to see Palace either put out a better side or just play better than we did on the night. Now, to be honest, I was quite foolish, and I've seen quite a lot of people say this, in the fact that I was quite looking forward to seeing the side. You know, people like Sorloth, who played so well at the weekend, someone like Max Mara as well, and obviously the fact that Gaeta, he's played well in pre-season, looked good in the games he's played in the Cup so far. So obviously it was quite nice to see how this team could go. You know, Sorloth, Meyer, Gaeta, would have been nice to see what they could do. And obviously someone like Wickham coming off the bench, would have been nice to see him, and maybe even someone like Ayew, you know, to see what they could do, and maybe even Jar Reedwood as well. So we had this team, we thought it would have been nice, quite looking forward to it, you know, sort of playing in the same system we had previously, but with new personnel who've done alright in previous rounds of the Cup. Obviously it was quite foolish in the fact that it could have been a potentially exciting night, but it was absolutely terrible, not just because of the football, but just the result as well. So everything about it wasn't really great. And actually, if you look at the team on paper, obviously it was strong enough to do the job when you sort of assume that players, if they had lived up to sort of maybe 80% of their reputation, so if players had all been playing at 80%, we probably would have won this game, mainly because of the quality we've got. You know, people like Gaeta, who's obviously done so well in the Spanish league last season, in La Liga. You've got someone like him in the side, someone like Meyer, who done so well at the weekend. So you've got players like this, plus the youth of Jara Reedwood, and, you know, the experience, I suppose, of Ayew as well from his time at Swansea and Aston Villa. So we've got players here who've got reputations. If they had played to at least their highest, even 80% of their full ability, then maybe we would have got something from the game, because on paper we ultimately should have been winning, albeit this was our second side. And obviously I was a bit nervous at the start. Obviously Jara Reedwood playing at centre back, like I said, he wasn't really the problem in the end, because he's not really to blame for the fact that we weren't really controlling the game, weren't really, you know, getting many chances inside the box. But I suppose that's a point to pick up. And, you know, I suppose he's not really the problem, but the fact that I was still a bit nervous, the fact that he plays much better in midfield than the defence, Obviously we thought that was going to put us under pressure, but at the end of the day, us playing badly combined with a fantastic goal by the opposition, obviously that's the main reason we lost. Now obviously, you know, it isn't the most important competition, you know, but the fact that we lost against lower league opposition is a bit disappointing, especially when you're outplayed, because I personally am not going to cuss Middlesbrough and say they were lucky. They were just better than us on the day. You've got to say it simply, they were just better than us, so they deserve to win. And hopefully, you know, you've always got big teams always seem to win the cup. Maybe it'd be nice for one of either Burton or Middlesbrough to actually go forth and maybe get to the final, because they've got a great chance to get at least one of these teams to get into the semi-final. So let's see where it can go from there. Now obviously we played better in the second half, but the fact that we were being overrun in that first half, we left it too late, and the fact that we just had that lack of quality in the final third, and the fact that we had no intensity as well, is the reason we lost the game. And I don't really want to dwell too much on it, but the fact that it was a second team, you know, they're sort of out there to sort of make an impact, try and actually sort of say to the manager, yes, I want to play, here's what I can do. The fact that none of them sort of showed up and actually showed what they could do was obviously a bit disappointing. And like we said, my final point really, and I've said this quite a few times already, but it would have been just so great to actually get through to the next round, not only because we would have got to the quarter final, and not only because we would have avoided something we've done for the last sort of 4 seasons or so, in the fact that we always get knocked out in the round of 60. Not only would that been great, but the fact that we would have got another lower league opposition in Burton in the next round would have been great. Because no disrespect to Burton, but ultimately, like this game, on paper we should be winning this game, and that would have probably given us a fantastic opportunity to get to the semi-final and maybe even the final after that. So really for me, final point is the fact that this was a massive opportunity missed. So I'm now going to move on to the Man of the Match award, but before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and who I thought had the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, as you probably heard it in player ratings and the fact that it was quite a disappointing performance, it is pretty difficult to pick out a few players from the game who actually done better than the rest, and that's mainly because just overall, even though the team performance was quite lacklustre, and even though a few players did stand out, I think overall it was quite a disappointing performance. Now obviously I went into quite a lot of detail at the end of the player ratings, just talking about the game as a whole, and I don't really want to dwell on it too much, but like I said, I think it's quite simply, you know, players didn't perform and it's pretty difficult to pick players out. But the 4 players I've picked out here who I thought were better than the rest were Vicente Gaeta, Max Meyer, Luka Milivojevic and Sam Woods. Now in terms of Vicente Gaeta, yes, he may not have been great in the fact that he conceded the only goal of the game, but the fact that quite early on in the game, the fact that when Middlesbrough were, you know, sort of peppering our goal with loads of shots, loads of crosses, the fact that he made quite a few crucial stops early on in the game was good. But obviously, like I said, there isn't too much you could do about the goal. So for the fact that he made quite a large number of saves early on in the game is the reason he's on this shortlist. Obviously, Max Meyer, obviously we'd expected him to have a little bit more influence and more impact on the game, and then he did have in the game, but the fact that he was one of our biggest threats going forward towards the end of the game, and the fact that when he had that freedom to go into his more natural role and actually be the creator and sort of the architect in the team, the fact that that improved his performance just goes to show that actually he would have performed even better if he had been playing in that more advanced position. And like I've said, playing in that more advanced position, even though he scuffed a few of his shots, the fact that he actually got into these chances, these opportunities in these sort of areas to actually get shots in the first place just goes to show the quality he's got, because when he was playing slightly deeper, the other players who were playing slightly further forward instead, they weren't really doing it. So it just goes to show the quality that Meyer has, albeit wasn't efficient in this game. The fact that he was able to get more chances than other players in his team just goes to show his quality. Obviously, Luka Milivojevic didn't start the game, but came off the bench and instantly had an impact. You know, he came on, the intensity suddenly went up, the quality on the ball, and the domination we had in the midfield went up. Because in the first half, you know, Middlesbrough, because they had more men in midfield, they had a greater control of the game. As soon as you brung Luka on, he gave that protection to the back four, whilst giving us that bigger control in the midfield, and arguably very comfortable on the ball and probably one of our best players, even though he played very little of the game, you know, last sort of half an hour or so. And the same could go for Sam Woods. Obviously the reason I put him on here is just the fact that he's a youngster making his debut for the club, he's a Palace fan, but the fact that he played so well in that little space of time he had just goes to show that the quality he's got and how he could develop going forward. And actually the fact that he didn't look out of place and just slotted into the team obviously shows how professional he is. But like I said already, the fact that he came on for his debut, even though he was only on the pitch for a few minutes or so, what I saw in them few minutes was quite impressive, and that's why he's on my shortlist. But personally for me, I do think there's only one clear winner here, and that's the guy who really did change the game for us. So for Luka Milivojevic, you're going to win this week's Man of the Match award. And, you know, congratulations for that, because like I've said, it was an overall very sort of drab, lacklustre team performance, but the fact that Luka came off the bench and impacted the game as he did was great. But like I've said in the player ratings, it was too little, too late, and we couldn't overall use that sort of that intensity or that increased intensity to go forth and change the game. But like I've said already, Gaita, Maya, Milivojevic and Woods both deserve a bit of credit from this game, albeit it was an overall bad team performance. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson and Sam Woods following the game.
Sam, unfortunately out of the cup this evening, but congratulations on making your Crystal Palace debut. How do you feel about that?
It's mixed emotions really. Like obviously really disappointed to be out of the cup, but then obviously very happy to make my debut. So it's a strange feeling.
And when you were charging forward at the end though, hoping to get an equaliser for yourself, you nearly got on the end of when Andros had that shot. It nearly came back to you, didn't it? Yeah,
I mean I was just trying to impact the game, trying to come on, make an impact, and had that one at the end as well from the corner. Just tried to head it across goal, but no one could get on the end of it unfortunately. But yeah, I feel like I done okay when I came on.
It was quite quick when you came because Pap went down injured. How long did you have to prepare yourself?
I mean, you prepare yourself as soon as you know you're in the squad. I think like you've always got to. You can't just be on the bench just sitting there watching it. You've always got to be like involved in the game and stuff. So as soon as I realised I was in the squad, I was preparing myself to make sure I was ready at any point to come on.
And what did Roy say to you?
Just said good luck, try and impact the game, and was really assuring, and it made me feel quite calm and relaxed.
You've trained with the first team squad quite a lot recently, haven't you? Do you feel like you've developed a lot in the past year?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're playing with higher quality players, you obviously become a better player yourself. So I'm just trying to learn every day in training, even in, like the game today. I'm learning all the time, and that's what I'm trying to do at the moment.
And as a lifelong Crystal Palace fan, this must be a great moment for you and but your family as well.
Yeah, my dad and my sister are in the stand, so it was really nice they came up to come support, and I saw them at the end, so that was a nice feeling. But obviously disappointed we got knocked out, and yeah, we just go again next game.
Yeah, and finally, just on the game today, what did you think of it from watching it on the bench and then coming on?
Very physical game. I mean, we knew that from watching Middlesbrough in the analysis that they were going to be quite direct, physical. So that's what we prepared ourselves for that game. And I think second half we dominated the game, just couldn't get that goal unfortunately.
Well, unfortunately out of the cup this evening, it was a tight game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a tight game and we lost it to a handball decision which unfortunately the referee missed, and followed up by one the striker. The ball bounced down to Saville and sat up very nicely for him to volley in, but it's a bit of a sad way to lose it, because I thought it was a tight game, yes, but I thought in the second half we took over and played much better than we'd done in the first half. Thought we looked very much in control of the game, but of course the problem is we're chasing a 1-0 deficit. We're playing against a team that can sit back and pack their box with players, and so it wasn't easy to get that clear-cut goal chance, or to hope for that lucky bounce or that lucky deflection which would come our way, which they profited from in the first half to score their goal.
We have mixed emotions for Sam Woods today, obviously because of the defeat, but making his debut as a lifelong Crystal Palace fan was a good moment for him, and his family are in the stands as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, he did very well too when he came on, so I'm pleased for him. I mean, obviously we were trying not to use too many of the younger players in this game because we knew it would be a tough one. We wanted to give a good account of ourselves, which we certainly did despite the defeat, but it was great to bring Sam on, especially to give him a chance to make his debut for the club, and I'm pretty sure if he continues working as hard as he's been doing and progressing as well as he's been progressing, it won't be the last time we'll see him in a Crystal Palace shirt.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson and Sam Woods had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Middlesbrough. But make sure to come on next week for my post-match review of the game against Chelsea. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.